This is Spartan 117.
Anyone hear me? Over.
Isolate that signal. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
And welcome back to Finish the Fight, a Halo podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Reiners.
And I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
And as always, let's go through we actually got a good amount of news that's been going on the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, with the Infinite trailer coming out a couple weeks ago, that's kind of led 343 to opening the floodgates, not only in Infinite, but some MCC news and just general news in the community as they keep releasing older Halo games that were on MCC to the PC. And, just having new merch and other things launch.
As well as, we've actually had 2 tracks from the Halo Infinite soundtrack release very recently. So go check those out on Halo's YouTube channel. They're reminiscent of Halo. I've seen the community kind of split on how they like them. But go check them out and find out for yourself. As well as Monster Energy now has a countdown on their website, and it ends at November 30th or December 1st, depending on your time zone. Yeah. So a lot of people are speculating, like, oh, this is the release of Infinite. Probably around then, yeah.
It'll more than likely be around that time. I mean, we've said this before. If it was an August, September release, which it's not, it would be fall. I mean, that's the buzzword for it. And October's pretty much always out of the cards, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because it's too spooky. And then November into very early December's holiday. So it's what we've been speculating this entire time, but this kind of narrows it down to probably a couple days or a release week.
Yeah, because we've seen that the multiplayer, another thing I want to bring up, the multiplayer is free to play. Multiplayer is for everyone. We don't know the extent of that, whether it's custom games as well, Forge, anything like that. Are we going to be getting theater capabilities with it? We just know right now that it's multiplayer.
And I've been calling it potentially a battle royale.
Potentially.
So leaked on a Japanese site that was showing the specs of it, one of the things that did say was a battle royale mode. Now, take that with a grain of salt as well, because it's Japanese leak from just a random aspect, but potentially.
And I mean, I can't translate Japanese, so by all means, it could be right, it could be wrong.
For all those haters on Instagram.
What if someone literally just pulled a random text from there and then just was like, oh, this is translated to Battle Royale, and everyone's like, huh, okay, and no one checked them on it?
Yeah, that's probably what happened. But yes, we've got that. We're going to try and wrap this up soon. We also have officially announced that we're going to get crossplay on MCC. So that'll be coming later this year. So we'll be able to play between the Xbox One and PC. So finally we'll start to bridge that gap before the release of Infinite, which they already kind of teased that we're going to be looking at crossplay coming with that as well.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of today's episode. We are going back into some comics. We are going to be covering Halo Initiation.
Yeah, and Halo Initiation is the 5th comic of the series in the Halo franchise. And it's surrounding Sarah Palmer and, her start of the Spartan IV program. It also dives into, a bit more on who and how the Spartan IVs really started, and gives you a little deep dive, well, let's say a kiddie pool dive into Palmer's and Davis's relationship as well.
Surface level.
It's very surface level. It's actually a kiddie pool with a bit of ice on top. But it gives you a little bit of idea on that. But this is also the first comic that would be published by Dark Horse Comics. So we're finally getting over to them.
In Halo franchise?
Yes, in the Halo franchise. Yes, this is not the first comic Dark Horse ever did.
I don't know that.
Dark Horse has been around a while.
I don't know that.
And Jesse doesn't know that. For the rest of you who know comics, you've known that. And the first issue of it was released August 14th, 2013.
Yeah, so let's move on and talk about Dark Horse Comics themselves. So
their first comic was this Halo comic.
Founded in 1986 by Mike Richardson in Milwaukee, Oregon, Dark Horse Comics is an American comic book and manga publisher. In 1980, Richardson started a comic book store Pegasus Books in Oregon. And with the success of the shop, he was able to fund his own comic book company, Dark Horse.
Which is pretty nuts to think about. That like you
yeah.
pop open like a mom and pop comic shop. Good rhyme right there. And it's definitely tough. Like it's definitely a tough thing to jump into. I mean, it's kind of like, 86 was still right before the downfall of a lot of comics.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to that weird kind of golden age that was but then now you're back on top.
Yeah. And so within a year, Dark Horse Comics would publish Dark Horse Presents, Boris the Bear, Hellboy, The American, The Mask, Trekar, Black Cross, and Frank Miller's Sin City. They've gone on to publish comics within the Alien universe, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Conan, Mass Effect, Dragon Age 300, and Star Wars.
Yeah, they're
Spawn. Sorry, I didn't include that as well. It's one of their bigger names right now.
They've done a huge amount of stuff, and they're known really well for picking up some of like these kind of like side items where it's like, a major publisher, whether it's like Image, Marvel, DC, something like that, wouldn't necessarily look towards it, but Dark Horse they are the Dark Horse.
Yeah.
They're the Dark Horse of it. Picking them up and producing some really awesome content, especially for niche bases.
Yeah, and they've become a staple over the year. And I mean, growing up, I read, as I said, I loved Spawn, and that was my first introduction into Dark Horse, and being like, there's something more than Marvel and DC out there.
Yeah, there's
that's impossible.
Yeah, there's some more than just superheroes. Neat. So we'll give you a little bit of information on Brian Reed. So Brian Reed was born July 1st, 1973 in Indiana. Reed is an American comic book writer who has worked on Spider-Man, Ms. Marvel, Captain Marvel, New Avengers, Secret Invasion, and Dark Reign, Sinister Spider-Man. Reed has not only written comics, but video games as well. He was a lead designer on Ultimate Spider-Man, Spider-Man Web of Shadows, and Mercenaries 2, World on Fire, and wrote 3 Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes episodes. So he's been in the game a bit, kind of adding a lot to, especially the comic industry, as we talked about, really delving deep into Marvel. Obviously has a large fascination with Spider-Man.
Yes.
And has stuck with it. And it's pretty cool. And one of the first things that Reed really did in, kind of the Halo universe was adapt the Fall of Reach novel into a comic.
Which there's been mixed reviews on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interpretation because you obviously have a superhero comic book kind of creator and writer coming into that. So it's always going to be, I don't want to say an adjustment period, but a stylistic choice elements.
Yeah.
He's going on to write for Initiation, issues 7 and 10 of Escalation, Halo 4, Halo 5, and a short story in Halo Fractures. In 2017, Reed would step down as narrative director, sadly, for the Halo franchise.
Yeah, I mean, we'll discuss that later on our Halo 5 episode, but let's talk about Marco Castillo. There's not a lot. We've talked about this in previous comic episodes. Usually artists, pencil artists, there's not a lot.
They're off the grid for some reason.
They're very off the grid. So Marco Castillo is an Italian comic book artist who is best known for his work in DC Comics. That's all I could find after about 20 minutes of diving on the internet. There's not a lot going on with the guy. As I said, they like to live off the grid, which is perfectly fine because the internet is sometimes dumb anyways.
yes, that is exactly how I think about it.
So let's move on to writing the comic itself. So as stated in the Spartan Assault episode, Halo Initiation is a tie-in comic to not only Spartan Assault, but Halo 4 as well, learning how the Spartan 4 program started and how Palmer became a part of it. The idea for Initiation came from not having enough time to tell more stories in Halo 4, which makes sense because we get the Spartan Force. We get Sarah Palmer. Who are these people?
Yes.
Doesn't matter. Chief is back. Move on from that, which I absolutely get. So 343 Industries wanted fans to know who Palmer really was. Even though we were introduced to the Spartan 4s in Halo 4, we had no explanation on where they came from or how long they've been around. Even though all previous Halo comics had been published by Marvel, it was time to move on and look for a new publisher. Dark Horse was their first choice, and since writer Brian Reed had previously worked with them, it was a perfect fit, which I will say, this is something Frank O'Connor said, and it's odd because when you look up his work, I couldn't really find anything from Dark Horse. I'm assuming he did, but it was just Marvel, 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 Marvel. So it's a little bit bizarre to me that they were like, well, we have a foot in the door because of Reed having this previous relationship with him, but it's like he has this great relationship with Marvel. That's what I was a little confused about.
Yeah, they probably took it because they probably met Reed with Marvel.
Yeah.
And because he probably just worked back and forth. And my assumption is the relationship at Marvel probably wasn't going too well, or publishing rights and how much they take a cut of was probably much higher at Marvel compared to Dark Horse. And probably knowing Brian Reed, they were like, okay, we have at least a foot in the door to get us an introduction to talk with them.
Yeah. At Comic-Con 2013, where the comic was officially announced, Frank O'Connor would even crack a joke about the many delays that Uprising would go through and how this wouldn't be an issue with Dark Horse. Remember, with our Halo Uprising episode, the comics were delayed like what, a year and a half by the initial original end date. Like,
yeah, because didn't they say something like every month or every month and a half, whatever it was, but it's supposed to be a timeline. Every this you're gonna have a comic.
Yeah, and it just kept getting delayed like a lot. So it was supposed to be kind of this pregame for Halo 3, and it ended up becoming coming out after Halo 3. So it was very bizarre. But when it came to writing Halo Initiation, Brian Reed had this to say. Palmer's a lot of fun to write because she's halfway to a force of nature. She's got a lot of, quote, shoot first, ask questions later in her bones. And so far in her life, that has proven to be the best operating procedure. Of course, the day will come that her style backfires and she realizes she needs to learn about something the rest of us call subtlety. Luckily for us, she's got a brute to fight in this comic, so that day's not here yet, which really the story doesn't necessarily, tackle that whole subtle approach. Her style in this comic, spoiler, is very just go, 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 shoot, shoot, shoot for the most part. The cover art is done by John Liberto, senior concept artist at 343 Industries. And the first issue would have an alternative cover created by Terry and Rachel Dodson. As always, we went through a little bit of who the writer and who the artist are. About writing the comic, there wasn't too terribly much information, but oh well. Now let's dive into all 3 issues of Halo Initiation, because this is the shortest comic we'll be covering so far. Let's dive into the summary itself of Halo Initiation.
So yeah, to start it off, Halo Initiation, obviously script by Brian Reed, art by Marco Castillo, colors by Michael Attier, lettering by Michael Heisler, front cover by Kenneth Scott, and the back cover art by John Liberto. And then also the publisher was obviously Mike Richardson. Collection designer, Justin Couch. Assistant editors, Ian Tucker and Aaron Walker. And editor, Dave Marshall. And, obviously publisher in and of itself was Dark Horse Comics. So here we go to start it off.
So we have Commander Musao 96, who we had talked about in our Ranking the Spartans episode. He is a former Spartan too. And so he meets up with some admirals from HICOM to discuss this idea that he's having. And I love this idea is that he starts talking about Spartans. And he makes a reference how basically we've been talking about them for a couple thousand years now. So and he's talking about ancient Greek Spartans all the way to John 117, because this panel shows a silhouette of an old Spartan in the background, and then we have Master Chief, and he's saying, we've been talking about Spartans for thousands of years. Haven't we been doing something right with them? And so he says, we really need to look into doing more Spartans. And
well, yeah, because he also brings up and talks about how you can see in these panels too just how much HICOM just has probably been hearing this from him a while, because not Spartans again. And he's like, listen, a panel like you was what allowed Catherine Halsey to do the Spartans too, to do the exact thing they did at Thermopylae, which was take away these kids from their families and train them just to be super soldiers.
Yeah.
So we need to have that again, because then he brings up, who saved you from the Covenant? Who saved you from insurrectionists?
Yeah.
Who saved you from this? And they're like, Spartans. And, he says, well, what's going to happen? Because this is now, post-Human Covenant War.
Yep.
So this is post that, because he basically brings up, is, yeah, our quote-unquote direct threat is not here. However, you have Sangheili, you still have the Sangheili around that are becoming more and more zealots. And kind of forming their own faction. As well, what about the insurrectionists?
Yeah.
We heard this in, Halsey's journal and various other options about how the insurrectionists have now, in their best interest, did a ceasefire during the Human Covenant War.
Yeah.
And sometimes came to the aid of UNSC. Most of the time it was just self-preservation.
Yeah, it was enough to get by. Like they were being friendly with UNSC just enough to say, okay, cool. Like we don't really have to be friends, but we'll help each other.
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy is kind of my friend,
my
but not
pal.
Yeah, it's like an acquaintance of mine.
Yeah, they weren't friend level just yet.
Yeah, so it talks about that. It talks about the insurrection may rise again, and we start to see that in a couple of the novels. We start to see it in Kilo 5 novels about how that's happening. What I really love about this, and I think they did really well, and they've done it in a lot of the Halo stuff, is bookend quotes. So you start the book off with a quote, you end it off. And so you have our, previous Spartan who, if you don't know anything about him yet, you see he's wheelchair bound.
Yep.
And you see that he was a Spartan, but we've never really heard of him. And, as we did our research into it, especially for that episode, kind of like Osman, he didn't make it through the augmentation process, but was still picked up by the Navy and is eventually going to head the Navy as the start of the Spartan IV program.
Yeah. Well, I even like at one point as he tells all these admirals, he's like, you owe me at least this conversation because he's like, everything I've been through, he's wheelchair bound now. He hasn't been able to walk almost all of his life. So he's telling them, you owe me this.
Yeah.
Like, and they're all like, okay. And he even shows some like panels of like showing their faces where he's describing like Catherine Halsey, like taking Spartans, everything. You can kind of, at least from my interpretation, kind of like sadness and regret on their faces of being like, we did let that happen.
Yeah, kind of like that anguish, like, ooh, well, you got us there.
You got us there. That was kind of sticky.
Yeah.
All right, we'll listen to you.
Because you can kind of hear they've been blaming Oni for a couple things, but he's like, no. It was Oni, but it was also FleetCom and you and everyone else who allowed this to happen.
Yeah, it was everyone.
It was everyone.
Yeah.
And, so to end this first kind of prologue chapter, we have them up there saying, they're like, oh, we're sorry that we didn't use. I don't need your apologies. What we need is more Spartans, so I made some.
Yep. Yeah, he essentially was just like, I'm not even asking for forgiveness or permission. I'm just telling you we need them, so I did it anyways.
So that's like your first block quote, and that's like almost like the da-da-da-da of like this whole book. It kind of starts that off. And so it just...
I didn't hear that after I read that.
Oh, it's soft. You have to pull the tab on the bottom of the book. It's like one of those cards where you have to like get the sound going.
That would be kind of cool, actually.
Dude, hey, copyright that. So now we kind of jump into 3 months earlier. So this is after pretty much they've already been tested and they ran through the comic basically. So it's prologue, epilogue basically, starting us into who now Sarah Palmer is.
Yep. Yeah, and we have her and her ODST teammates running for their pods and getting ready. And Sarah Palmer is narrating this section, and she's talking about how, you're at a dinner party and people tell you, what do you do for a living? And she's very prideful in the fact that she can say, I'm an ODST. I don't have a desk job or anything like that. And I love what I do. And it shows her going into these drop pods and dropping down onto the surface of a planet. Because they're saving an admiral who's in a warthog with a marine trying to escape some nasty, actually just a nasty brute from what we see.
Yeah, because we know that there's something going on, because from a viewpoint you see two warthogs with their turrets firing backwards, so they're obviously escaping something. However, we see the first, like you said, the first brute chieftain swing his hammer down and take that first warthog out, just decimated.
And then I think it shows he's throwing the hammer at the second one.
Yes,
he's just like, screw it, I don't want it anymore. Which is something we've never seen before, is them throwing the hammers.
I think it's really cool. I think it's very much brute nature of that kind of instability and just rage of like, they're getting away. Like, I don't have a gun right now. Just throw it. And so in that throw, he hits the turret of that second Warthog with enough force to cause him to kind of swerve and then tip over sideways.
Yeah, and this is where then Sarah Palmer shows up to the scene, and she basically goes like full Spartan on him already. Granted, she's still just a ODST, but she essentially starts going hand to hand with him, which is really impressive.
Yeah, I thought this was such a cool panel because you have that admiral kind of getting back up, holding this blue, glowing tube.
Yeah,
we still don't know what it is yet.
Very reminiscent of how Cortana's transported in Halo Reach.
Yes, very much so. So that might give you away what we're going to be seeing here. And so, I love it because you have this, UNSC kind of higher up with no armor on. He's in kind of his dress blues, basically, and panicking. And that's when, like, she drops down. It's such a cool panel of that orbital drop pod, like, right there. Not realistic that you kind of control it, but, just serendipitously.
You can steer it, kind of. But come on, folks.
Yeah, but I love it because, yeah, you're like, she goes out, she launches out, hammer swings horizontally, like kind of like a side swing, jumps over it, and like you said, yeah, just starts going hand-to-hand combat and shoves her BR into the side of him, like under his armor, and just holds the trigger down.
Yep, yeah, just starts unloading on him, and he falls over, and she kind of thinks like, okay, this is a defeat. And then as she's talking to this admiral, more Covenant show up to just kind of ruin their conversation.
Yeah, I assume it's the rest of the party that was kind of around. It's kind of like in 3 when you have to fight that brute, but it's like other brutes around. It's like an honorable duel.
Yeah, so it's just you and him, which I think actually in the lore, if he were to have beat Master Chief, that brute chieftain would have become the new chieftain of the brutes.
It's true.
And this is that mission in the arc, by the way.
Yeah, but anyway, back to the comic with that. Very reminiscent of it, but yeah, you see her kind of being like, all right, now get down, let's handle this. At this time, too, it seems that, not that there's a disconnect, but I don't think the ODSTs really knew why they were dropping. They knew they had probably a rescue mission, but she's like, why are you here? I thought like all the higher-ups were evac'd.
Yeah. And
so that's when he says, I couldn't let the base AI be destroyed or taken into enemy hands, so I had to come get it myself.
That's honorable.
And that too, whenever she goes to Bosman and is like, hey, there's this dude here. And he's like, I thought he's alive?
Yeah.
Like, we thought he was just like KIA'd or MIA totally.
My family thinks every time they see me, like, you're still alive? My God.
And it's like, yep, just carry my AI around. Yeah, but it continues on, and this is where she literally says it. They're between a rock and a hard place. You now have that brute chieftain get back up. He just kind of got dazed.
Well, you shoot his armpit. I mean, come on.
It's true, but now he's kind of in that rage mode where he knocked their armor off. He's kind of going insane. You see him pick his hammer back up, and this is very much Halo video game-esque in my opinion.
The scene is beautiful.
Oh, it pretty much is right there in the game. So she basically tells him, they see both sides, and she's like, all right, when I say go, run towards that brute. And he's like, what are you talking about? And you see her take a frag grenade and just kind of throw it behind him. And as they're running, they're like in the panel, you'd say they're, I don't know, 5 feet, 6 feet from that brute maybe in the panel.
Yeah, very close.
But below that is an explosion, and the Warthog just flipping and flipping and flipping, and then comes to settle down right in front of them, between them and the brute, on its wheels, ready to drive.
Just a little smoke around it.
Yeah, you still got some broken windows, you still got some damage, but...
Yeah, and then of course the brute's like, "Rah!" And then as she's getting the admiral into the Warthog, she gets hit in kind of like that shoulder chest area with a needler round. Yeah, and so they do manage to escape nonetheless, but she is injured during this battle, but not enough to take her out entirely.
No, it's pretty crazy too, because I didn't notice this before. But she actually gets hit twice.
Oh, she does. I just noticed the first one.
I only saw the first one.
Well, because they only put one thunk there. Unless they both hit at the same time, but they should have done like a thunk 2X.
A think thunk.
Think thunk, something like that. That's just bad writing.
Yeah, but so she gets hit in like, I would say the hip. And and then like the
abdomen,
and then like in the upper shoulder area. But she's still going at it. So she hops into the driver's seat as the higher up jumps into the back, jumps into the turret and starts firing at that brute. And
this guy holds his own.
Oh, this guy definitely
I will
holds his own.
say, I wish I would have saw more of him. Spoiler, there's no more of him really in the comic, but this guy shoots a shot.
That's the thing, is I wish we had more of that. You know, more of like the higher-ups or Admiralty kind of not serving a frontline purpose at all, but being there and like fighting it back. And we see a little bit. Like we see like, you know, the gunnery, whenever you get your armor in 2, he's kind of like fighting them down and little things like that I do like. But I do love this. We go back into Palmer's head. She's kind of monologuing. And she says, well, my dad told me once that pain was all in my head, because she's talking about those needler rounds. I told him I thought he was wrong. And then another panel is, he also told me, you know, revenge is never as sweet as you think. I also now think he's wrong. And this is where she takes the Warthog and just runs over that brute chieftain and then just turns it onto these grunts and just is running everything down.
So it's kind of like this Halo Grand Theft Auto collab going on right now. You just run everyone over.
Yes, just 3 stars right now on this planet trying to get away.
Yeah, but so moving on from that scene, now we have Palmer. She's in a hospital bed and she's recovering, and she gets this unexpected visitor. And I love how this conversation goes about first, because it's this guy in a suit and he's talking to her, and she's trying to figure out who he is at first. She's like, she thinks that he's some kind of hospital admin or something like that.
Yeah, because he basically says, you know, you have, from your record, you have a huge amount of respect for the Marines and the ODSTs around you. Why are you treating the nurses and doctors here like crap? And that's when she's like, oh, you must be hospital admin, aren't you?
Yeah, because he's starting to pick up, like, or she says that, I don't like when people think they're smarter than me, because you know, really, she's not listening to the doctors or anything, and he's saying, you know, I'm not hospital admin. He eventually explains I'm here for recruitment, and we find out this is June from Halo Reach, actually. So he's hung up his Spartan armor for a suit and tie.
It reminds me, if you've ever seen Gotham, whenever they put in the Calendar Man, that's what he looks like.
But yeah, so he's coming to say, listen, the Spartan Project's coming back up. We want to ask you to be a Spartan. And then she's just like, what? Because again, Spartan 3s aren't really known. Spartan 2s are legends. There are people who still at this time really don't know the legitimacy of it.
No, because she even brings up, because he just brings up, are you familiar with the Spartans?
Yeah.
And she just goes, big robot looking guys in the big armor stomping around that make us look bad? Yeah, I know who they are.
Yeah. And that's when he's like, well, you want to be one? And then she's like, oh. I don't know. She maybe didn't gasp. I don't know.
No, she went,
Okay.
She villager noised it and then went, excuse me. So that kind of ends that panel there. So that kind of ends us on cliffhanger-ish. Then we jump over to a secret location.
Secret.
And we see a couple kind of coveralled individuals under, at the time, what looks like kind of like a blue glowing bottom of a ship. It's kind of like a hologram.
Yep.
And it's this going back and forth, almost like a who's on first. Like, this can't be real. It's real. We saw it. No. Can't be real. There's no way it's real. My dad said it's not real. No, it's real. It's real. It's real. And then it's just this back and forth.
No, it's not real.
Yeah, and they're like, okay, fine. But we see like 4 or 5 individuals kind of talking over this, saying, you know, well, if we do this mission, like, we need to figure out what we're going to do. And then we get this really cool 2-page spread, and we're seeing top secret UNSC, and it's the UNSC Infinity kind of diagram of the entire ship, because they're basically talking about how, you know, we need to take things for ourselves. We need to liberate. So we're kind of seeing that insurrection is surmounting. You know, it was brought about, and we get a quote from this woman with black hair saying, "We steal it for ourselves."
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence. This is kind of one of those moments.
Yes, this is 100% that, which I just watched the other day, by the way.
A classic.
Yeah. So we start off with that. It's 2 panels, and it's pretty great. So that kind of ends this little interlude. It's kind of like one of those like little side stories going on in between what we're seeing.
Yep.
So that kind of ends that.
Yeah, and so then moving on from that, we have Sarah Palmer narrating her experience becoming a Spartan IV.
And I think this, too, is the first time we really get any insight into what the augmentations for Spartan 4s are.
Yes.
Because she actually goes and breaks each piece of it down.
Yeah, so she talks about how her muscles have been coated with a substance that lets them work harder without tearing my skeleton apart. I have that same problem too when I work out, just so you guys know. So she also has corneal implants to help her see in the dark, which I believe all Spartans had previously. Her heart's got, quote, something weaved into it that lets it pump hard enough to help me outrun a horse. Her lungs are lined with a polymer that enhances oxygen intake and allows her to process toxins. She can also breathe methane for almost an hour.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, and which she says, you know, like, hopefully I'll never have to use because, ugh. That's pulled straight from the comic. And they talked about they tweaked the bacteria in her gut to help her get more nutrients from food.
It's some of my favorite aspects of sci-fi because I love in sci-fi whenever they do stuff like this. They do like enhancers, and it's like you sit around like a round table of like, well, what do we do? Like, what do humans lack that we need to push? And it's even stuff like we put in better gut flora so that it pulls more nutrients when it's digesting. Like, I think that's such a neat aspect.
Yeah, and they also like tweaked her blood. I love that she doesn't understand all of this. Because she says they tweaked something in my blood to help me clot faster, stuff like that. And then she says, pulling from the comic, and last but not least, there's a handful of tiny implants designed to keep tabs on my insides for the Spartans' med teams. I'm a regular 26th century girl.
I love that stuff. And to me, this pulls up, even though I don't think they mean this at all. If we go back to her talking with June about the doctors not having someone smarter than her, it feels like she's trying to memorize these things to get those smarts. Like you said, she doesn't know everything that's happening, but she knows like layman's terms on what's going through and what truly matters.
Yeah, so she says that there's 3 weeks left of recovery. And afterwards, we see that the 5 Spartans that they chose for this was Spartan Sarah Palmer, Edward Davis, Young had Holst, Vladimir Scruggs, love Scruggs.
I love Scruggs.
Scruggs, and Joel Thomas. So we have June and an admiral watching these 5 Spartans go against a squad of Marines. And they have no armor or anything like that. And I think they said it's a 10-on-1 situation where...
Yeah, and it's very reminiscent, like, because you can see June's kind of probably pulling from his training. It's very reminiscent to the early Spartan training of kind of those black suits, almost like scuba armor stuff, you know, whatever you want to call it, just a tight suit.
So they're scuba diving after this.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and so...
Try to give you the best description just from looking at it.
Yes, and so it's basically, it's not even capture the flag. Their objective is to just press this big red button. I always love it's a big red button, nothing else. If you have a button, visually, it has to be big and red.
Gotta be big and red?
Why can't they be square occasionally? I don't know.
Yeah, and reminiscent to June's training, you know, because when we were looking at the Spartan 3s, you know, working together in different teams with that, you know, also reminiscent of Spartan 2. So it's kind of all brought up with those different trainings.
Yeah, and so eventually these 5 new Spartans are making their way to this big red button, all but Palmer are taken out or, you know, like tased or whatever. And so eventually she finally gets there. She gets the big red button, presses it, and is like, yep, you know, we did good. And June's just kind of like comes out and is like, well, you really didn't do the mission. She's like, what do you mean? We pressed the button. And this is very much so a parallel with a Fall of Reach, because he's like, oh, like you only pressed the button, but you didn't do it as a team. You ran ahead, everything like that. It's not about glory. You know, you let yourself get taken out by regular Marines. Like, what the hell was that? And so eventually these Spartans are like, well, when are we getting our armor? Like, Spartans are supposed to be in armor. Like, that's what makes us Spartans. So you have Musa telling them, like, it's not really about this armor. You know, it's about fighting side by side and working together and all that, because you can't do this just for the glory. That's not what this is about.
Yeah, and that's when Palmer kind of brings up, well, like, what would you know about it? Like, and he's like, I was an OG Spartan. Like, I was there for the start of it. Yeah, and he even says at one point, you know, Spartans don't have ranks because Spartan is your rank, which Spartan still had ranks. Yeah, but I think that's because she brings up, because he calls her Spartan Palmer, And she's like, oh, no, no. She's like, no, no, no. You're Spartan now. Like, you're just Spartan.
Yeah, and it says, you're Spartans now. You need to start acting like it.
Even though Master Chief is the first rank we get. But, and then we jump back over to the outside of the UNSC Infinity.
This mystery crew.
Yeah, and so this is in a top secret Dort Cloud facility, the old Dort. And this is where we start to see this tiny ship coming up and see a bunch of those blue coveralled people again, the insurrectionists. And we're starting to see that that black-haired woman is the leader. She's saying, we go in, we need to take who we can. Like, we're taking this by quote-unquote force, but not. But they're basically saying we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, but they don't know we're coming.
Yeah.
And we're basically staging as a mechanic crew coming on. Because at this point, too.
Oldest trick in the book.
Yeah, the Infinity is still kind of being built. And it still has some systems that are offline. It still has some measures that aren't fully intact. So it's kind of like, you'd say it's like 80%, 90% there. They still have some things they have to do. So this crew starts to sneak on and, says, we're just a construction crew. We're going to play nice until I say not to. They're kind of sneaking in. And so this is where we see in the Infinity Landing Bay 5, and they come on and they go, oh, construction crew, follow me. So that's the start. Then we cut back to June talking with the Spartan. This is where they're also landing at pretty much the same time. And this is where we get to meet, for the first time in the book, Captain Del Rio. And he's like, June's like, Captain Del Rio, permission to come aboard, sir. And
we also got Lasky with him as well.
Yes, so this is where we're seeing Lasky as well. And he's basically makes Lasky's tour guide. He's like, Commander Lasky here. He'll walk around the ship. It's going to take you about 17 days to make this walk, because this is like 3 miles, but you're going to do it. So they start off on that, and this is where, the Spartans that come aboard have that shock and awe moment of like, does the UNSC not make anything tiny? And they're like, oh, inferiority complex much? And just kind of going on and on about that and poking fun at each other.
Yeah,
and
because they're just, I think everyone we know in the lore seeing this thing, this is something that no one's seen before, like unlike anything.
No, this is clearly the largest ship ever created by the UNSC.
And most powerful as well, because we're using 400 technology.
Yeah, it's pretty much just, it's like if you went to like a junkyard, started pull this 400 tech to make this cool like jalopy. You got the Infinity. And this is where they're kind of talking about, 300 Spartans will train on here. That's why we made the ship huge.
Yeah.
So this whole level's just Spartan territory for training, for eating, for mounts, for all this stuff. And basically like rolling out this red carpet of the Spartans, like, oh, this is pretty sweet.
This is our turf now. Yeah, and so eventually we do have this insurrectionist leader of this like little ragtag leader, and she starts to talk to this
one of the bridge
captain.
crew. Yeah, one of the bridge crew.
And so she says like this ship will have a complement of 17,151 crew eventually. And so he's just kind of like, what are you saying?
Why do you know?
Yeah,
these
and she's
things?
like, oh, you've only got a few hundred, and then all of a sudden all the insurrectionists kind of surround him and pull a gun on him. So they're starting to take everyone, because next thing you know, they get on the bridge of the ship and they're starting to take over, telling all the crew,
get away from your computers.
Well, this is something interesting. Is then the AI looks at this leader and goes, what are you doing? And then she gets cut off because the leader turns her off. I guess AIs just have a button they could just turn off.
You gotta save power.
And so, so now everyone's kind of confused for a second of like, wait, because not everyone knows who she is. Like, clearly the AI does, and I think a few other crew kind of realize like, oh, we kind of know who that is.
Yeah, because they're like, wait, why did she say she knew you? And that's when she started like shouting and be like, all right, everybody, get in this room, we're locking you in. And you can clearly see in that top panel that you have Del Rio with them.
Yeah, so Del Rio and the rest of these captains and crew are now in this room, and I love that they get put into this room and they try to use the computer, and they're like, oh, it's offline. It's like, they're clearly very smart. You really think they would be like, oh my god, we left the computer on, our plan is ruined.
Because you even see in the panel right below when she's putting him in the room, it's like, all right, cut communications, like do this, do that, and like she's like barking orders to these people who know exactly what they're supposed to do. So she basically, you know, it's inferred that she basically helped train this crew who knew their way around a ship.
Yeah, and so eventually she comes on the comms and the computer. She says, you know, good afternoon. My name is Isla Zane, and I have control of this ship. So she's announcing that, you know, everyone's safe for now. Like, just don't do anything stupid, and no one's gonna get hurt. One of those spiels.
But so as you know, her speech is going through. It's kind of like those loudspeaker bubbles where there's like spikes that it's like going over a loudspeaker. We start to see, you know, various aspects of the ship hearing this. And we see, you know, even more people being surrendered, and finally it making its way down to Lasky and the Spartans in June.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, we need to make it to the bridge. You know, we need to figure this out. You can kind of tell June is kind of like, huh,
Okay.
well, yeah, let's deal with this.
Yeah, and so this is where Palmer is approaching Lasky and is like, listen, if we are going to do this, I need some armor. And he says, well, as of right now, our armor is limited, and there's only Scout, Soldier, Recon, and Recruit, and she picks Scout. And she's like, that's fine by me. June comes in and says, you know, Palmer, you're not cleared. And she says, we're Spartans, June. It's time to start acting like it. Because then she gets all armored up.
Yeah, she's in that sweet armor machine.
Which it makes sense because, you know, he is trying to be like, whoa, like, we shouldn't be doing this. And she's like, it's now or never.
Well, and I think it goes back and forth. Because if you infer that if people in the ship knew who she was, June might. That's when June's like, hold on a second, we need to kind of discuss things. And she's like, no, I'm a Spartan. And this is also kind of lore-ish. This is the first time we really get to see armor selection in anything but a game.
Yeah.
So that kind of becomes...
Are we playing a game right now?
I think we are. So it kind of becomes a little canonical in a way of being like, okay, armor selection was a thing at this point because, you know, the O2, the Spartan 2s, they had their armor. Like, that was the armor you got at the start, and you kind of just got the next iteration of Spartan armor.
Yeah, and it was the same armor.
It was all Mjolnir going forever.
For everyone, because that was something, you know, Halsey could tell who a Spartan was regardless of their armor because it was all the same.
Yeah, and you had, you know, Spartans that had some things that were different with their armor, which were like small customizations, but there was never full-fledged, this is Scout armor. Obviously, you know, lighter armor, less on it that could make you quicker and lighter, or recon, things like that. So it's kind of neat to be able to see that in a book for the first time to show that there was somewhat of a choice this time and that they were doing these things to kind of fit the Spartans into the battlefield they were going into.
Yeah. So moving on from that, we go back to Isla Zane, and they're talking about how about an hour and a half they're going to meet up with their buyer. So they have someone, they never say who, let's just assume a powerful insurrectionist leader who wants to buy the UNSC Infinity.
Or maybe a UNSC defector, who knows?
We go back and it's Palmer, and she's got her new fancy white Scout armor, and she's, you know, telling the rest of the Spartans, hey, armor up, we're going to go take out these insurrectionists. And so this is when we get a little bit of exposition. June says, like, listen, like, you actually don't know who this is. Like, this is Isla Zane. She was actually the first Spartan 4. We wanted a Spartan that wouldn't need armor whatsoever. Like, other than this scuba diving suit, really, she would just be this perfect killing machine. And they found out that, you know, it's like her bones are unbreakable, and she's stronger than any of you. And she basically just went crazy.
Yes, because what they were saying is, was there a total of 7 they tried again?
I think so.
It was 7. 6 died, and she was the only one to make it. However, it messed with her brain so much that, like you said, she just kind of became a one-track, unstable killing machine.
Yeah, and so this is where they're just kind of like, well, we have to do this. So Spartan Davis and Spartan Palmer break off because they have an idea that they're going to roll with to try to take out these insurrectionists.
Yes. And within that same time, you know, we have this talk with Del Rio, you know, with the other guys in there, and he's, you know, finally gets access to the computer, but can't access the AI because they knew that the AI Ain was down. And she Zane had brought this up earlier.
Zane and Ain.
Yeah, Zane and Ain. I think it's pretty much you know, they're the same in the one. Who knows? But with Aang, Zane knew, you know, who, like to take it down, and knew that Aang, man, we're going with Zane Aang, this is crazy, but AI Aang was just a temporary one. It's a smart AI, but it was like a smart builder AI, if you want to think of it in that way. Like, she was overseeing the ship and making sure things run, but not in the way of like super smart AI and learning like Cortana. So she's like in that middle ground of dumb, smart, I guess, in a way. And so then this, anyway, going back to where we were, we have Del Rio get access to the computer and punch in his codes. And it's kind of like a nuke launch. You need both codes to kind of destroy the world in a way. But for this, you need 2 codes to override the system and to get total control to like 2 computer terminals. So this is kind of, I assume, in prep of if pirates ever took over or whatever happened, you need both Del Rio and Lasky, who are the 2 commanders of this ship currently, to punch them in, and they can do what they need to do. Because they figured once they can do that, they can flood the air out of the bridge. Because that's one thing we're going to learn, is that there are multiple ports that we've seen in other ships where you flood the oxygen to kill the fire.
Yeah.
But they're using it in different ways. We see the Spartans, Sans R2 on our secret mission, running towards the bridge. And then this is where Zane comes on and is like, hey, one more step and we start shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're even accompanied by June.
Yeah, June's with him. June's looking like, now he's looking like Hitman.
He is, yeah, because he's bald. He's got a suit. He's got a tattoo on his face.
Yeah, he's got a gun.
Yeah,
like, he's
yeah,
definitely Hitman 100%. So they make it past this little barrier, and she goes, hey, you know, here's an idea of what'll happen if you start coming closer. And she does exactly what Del Rio wants to do. She ends up flooding all the oxygen out of the S deck that they're on, which is a Spartan deck.
Yeah.
And you see like some people start flying out of those different air holes.
Air holes, yes.
The best way I could describe those reports. And you see the 2 Spartans, I forget who's in this armor, but grab both Lasky and June as they start to go out and give them oxygen masks.
Yep.
You know, right away to make sure that they can make it through this. And they're like, all right, never mind. Like, we've got to go. Like, if she already knows how to do these type of things and has full access to the ship, we got to go. However, we figured out, and this is where Lasky, like, magically is like, give me to a computer terminal. I'll punch in my codes. And along with Del Rio's codes already in there, they get access to the ship. And this is where, because she still has, Zane will still have access to it, but they also do, I guess, in a way, kind of open the systems back up. Yeah. And allows them to black out the cameras for a minute. And that's when June kind of debates it, but everyone's like, everyone says, we need to get to the bridge. It's our one option we have right now. This is our maybe our one shot we have before she floods all the oxygen out except for the bridge and just takes this ship.
Yeah, well, because I remember at one point she talks about how she's hesitant to even call the crew worker or the crew members innocent in a way. Like, she's like talking about innocent lives, and she's willing to do it at the end of the day because she doesn't see them as innocent people. So
yes, yeah, because I think she says innocent. Well, not so much.
Yeah,
you know, kind of says they're
guilt by association.
Exactly, and they're part of the UNSC. And we see now that she has these different groups set up of different insurrectionists, and they're crewing up and kitting out and getting these ARs. And she tells them, sweep S deck, go and find them, take out these Spartans, because this is after those cameras go down.
Yeah.
And so they're heading out. Yeah, because she says the buyer expressed interest in any command crew we can keep alive. Speaking of which, probably time to get Admiral Drake on the horn. So this is when we're learning that there's a higher up that is, you know, guiding these insurrectionists, or possibly the buyer, or we don't know anything too much yet about Drake, but we know that there is structure within the insurrectionists. We've known that for a while, but, you know, is this a, like most of them, UNSC deflector who left and is using that knowledge and skills to probably operate these missions?
Yeah, yeah.
Because you have to remember that Zane is pretty much a Spartan at this point, so has the speed, the strength, the indestructible bones, things like that. And so, yes, that's when we first learn about that. Now this is where we start to get these talks between Del Rio and Lasky going back and forth, kind of, I guess, informing either side of what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, saying like, oh, she locked us in here. Like, we're okay. Where are you guys? And this is now, too, where we learn about that secret mission that Palmer and Davis are on, because Del Rio asked Lasky, he's like, hey, so you still got those 5 Spartans? And he's like, oh, 3. And Del Rio's like, you lost 2 of them already? He's like, no, they're just gone. They're on a secret mission.
Yeah, they ran away.
Yeah, they just left. No, but then we get this exterior shot of Infinity, and we see 2 little Spartans hanging around outside. You know, and it's kind of neat to have this little moment between them of just taking in the scenery. And talking about, man, it's actually kind of pretty, you know, out here in space.
I think one of them refers to it as like a postcard moment.
Yes, so like this is a postcard moment for sure. And we see both of them outside kind of jabbing at what's coming or what's been in Halo games. They talk about, man, it would be really nice if we had jetpacks.
Yeah, I love that they like foreshadowed it.
And saying, you know, maybe we could ask for a thing like that. Maybe that's a thing we already can get.
And then we get them in Halo 4. They predicted Halo 4. So we do eventually start making our way to the bridge itself, and this is
from the exterior. So we're still following the 2 kind of flying around.
Yeah, and so this is where they kind of realize like they have one shot to do this, and they eventually break their way in. And we see some, like, I love this bridge crew guy just fly out of the window.
Yeah, the insurrectionist bridge guy.
Yeah, I love that term as well.
And I like this too, because this is where we start to see, and we'll talk about kind of the shortcomings of this, but this is where we see the minuscule amount of interaction between Palmer and Davis. They talk about, because Davis says, she's mine. Palmer says, she's mine, and Davis says, whoa, whoa, whoa. I have to take out 4 of them, and you have to take out 1 of them? And I love that she responds with, mine has indestructible bones and is basically a Spartan. You just got 4 little people.
Yeah. And so after, you know, this poor guy flies out into space, she goes hand-to-hand with Isla Zane. Palmer does. And we see pretty quickly they're a match, and Palmer's in her armor.
Yes.
And Isla's not. She's taking her on, blocking her punches and everything, without armor, which I think is pretty impressive. And she's even like messing with her. She's like, oh, you're adorable. Look at you in your big girl armor, almost like you're a real Spartan. And so this is when they start going back and forth. And again, it seems like they're kind of equals.
Yes, it definitely does, because you see their different fighting tactics that they have. And we see just the prowess that Zane has. One, she survived the whole deoxygenation, the venting. Put it that way. The venting of the oxygen whenever they broke the port windows.
Yeah.
And she's able to talk and sort of, like, she never took a moment to have to catch her breath.
Yeah.
So we see already, without armor, she's already still a tank.
Yeah. And so as they're fighting, it switches over after a big old thoom there at the bottom corner. We see we're back now to Del Rio, who's talking to Lasky and June and the other 3 Spartans.
and this is great, too, because he's saying, we're still building this, and it's getting destroyed. What do we do? Like, he's a numbers guy. You can tell, because in that panel with that Thoom, Palmer takes Zane and smashes her on, like, the command console, and you just saw Del Rio, like, just adding the numbers up in his head. Yeah, gotta buy a new one of those.
He's like, what the hell is that? He's like, sounds like they're tearing the place apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so eventually, as they're sitting there kind of talking, June and Lasky and the rest of the Spartans, the rest of the insurrection shows up and starts firing at them. And I love this bottom one right here, is that one of the Spartans covers Lasky and just takes a shot because he has the shields. So that we're automatically seeing, like, even though we didn't see a lot of training in this comic, we know it's there, because the first instinct is to cover the commander. I can take it. He can't. He doesn't have armor.
I'm also interested, too, if that's just instinct as, you know, as a Marine, as an ODST, that you protect your commander.
To that extent, I wouldn't know either or.
Because I'm interested in that, because I guess we were just inferring that they know the armor can take these things, but that was just a split-second decision. So I think that was more of a militaristic, you know, protect my comrades type thing, but also oh yeah, I have a shield.
Yeah, and so eventually, I love they do get Lasky out of the fire, and Lasky's like, where's June? Like, I'm not the only one with armor. They're like, he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
Like, he's clearly fine. So Lasky's like literally trying to make his way back into the fight, and they're like, no. And that's something I do like about Lasky. He's always first on the front lines, if he can be.
Yes. You know, I mean, we saw it. We saw him run, take a hunter blast, do some flips when he's a kid. It happens.
True. And then even then in Spartan Ops, we see him go toe-to-toe with a Promethean somehow. But you know what? That's fine. But eventually he does make his way over to this computer because he realizes, oh, I can just drop a door and seal them in this room. And then I love that after he does that, the Spartans are like, oh, whoa, we're not done with this fight. Open it up. And he's like, we won. You got to learn when to stop.
Yes.
They're in this room. They're contained. We need to move on from that.
Yeah, we won this. They're not all KIA. It's not just like who can have a 0 total on the battlefield. That's not our mission. Our mission is bridge.
Yeah, and this isn't Spartan games, folks. These are real people. Yeah, so we move back to Isla and Sarah Palmer fighting, and like I love this. She gets her face just smashed into a wall, and like her nose is now obviously broken. But again, they're still kind of equals until Palmer tries to pull out a gun, and Isla's like, like if we're gonna do this, it's with
mano y mano, it's hand to hand.
Yeah, and she talks about, you know, like she even says like let's get personal, and they're still fighting, and I do love when you have a fight where there's just a lot of like talking involved as well, but eventually,
well, and we see in a panel before this, we see that Zane now has Palmer just with both of her hands wrapped around her neck. And you can clearly see that she's choking her out.
Yeah, and so this is when Del Rio shows up and does the classic, get off my ship. And Ain, not Zane.
Yeah, activates Ain again.
Yeah, and she talks about, okay, like, or she's like, do you want me to get them off? And he's like, yep. So I guess a new door opens up from before.
What I assume is that similar to what happened in the S deck, there's those, you know, basically port doors, the huge ones that'll come over the glass, like you've seen in Star Wars or anything.
Oh, yeah.
So they probably opened that back up.
So they have a JK button for when they open back up.
Yes, it's a funny button.
Yeah, and so this is when Isla's like, I'm not done with you yet. And then this is when this is where Palmer does like a cliche, like punches her in the face and is like, stand down, you've been relieved of your duty. Like, gotta love the cliches they throw in there as well.
Yeah, that's like the dun, but like on a kazoo. It's still kind of cool, but it's kind of just overplayed.
Oh my gosh. And then, yeah, so now everyone starts to recover, and Davis says to Palmer, like, I won the race. I think he's talking about
because he took down 4 of them before she took down hers.
She's like, oh, I'll get you next time. And everyone's kind of coming back together. And Del Rio is like, good to see you again. And this is where he's like, oh, well, I guess we have some repair work we got to do to this big old ship. And so now it's moving on. And we have kind of that narration again. And we see someone
we see the cliffhanger of the book.
We actually do have a cliffhanger because we see this panel of admirals and whatnot that from the beginning of the book talk to Musa as we see Isla Zane floating in space, and they're talking about, you know, you made her a monster, you made this killing machine, and as they're describing this,
we see a ship uncloak.
Yeah, this ship that I don't even recognize the design. I'm going to assume insurrectionists, but then again, we see, are those like what are those stripes that are on this side of these commanders as well and admirals? Am I crazy, or is that just a design thing? Okay.
I want to say that it's the admiral that's picking them up. I think it's a defected admiral.
Yeah. Okay. So she does get picked up in outer space because God knows how long she can survive out there. And eventually she wakes back up and she's in a chair and she says, you know, gasp, what are you doing here?
Yeah, and that's where we're left off with at least her story. Because the ship we see decloak, kind of Jesse was saying, it has like 4 bars. I mean, it's very much surmised, I guess you would say, that this was possibly a UNSC ship turned insurrectionist, that it can cloak, and that it's kind of more the spy ship that we've seen in stories before.
Yeah, I do appreciate the idea of her story is left on a cliffhanger because you're like, what? Yeah. And so we move on then, and now we're back to it. Now it's actually showing the admirals and Musa, and they're talking about, you know, they were kind of trying to grill him, like, you know, you did this to Isla, and he was saying, you know, listen, like, we did this before we had your permission. Like, this was like an Oni thing that just kind of happened. Clearly, you know, it was not good to do at the time that we didn't know any better. And they do also confirm, you know, they're still trying to turn down the Spartans. He's saying, well, Spartans are the reason you have Admiral Mattias Drake's people in custody, like half a dozen of them. So
yes. And this is once again the admiral that we're thinking defected and is now leading the insurrectionists, at least in this territory.
Yeah, and so
because it goes on, he goes on and talks about the Spartans are the reason you have these in custody. The Spartans are the reason that you have, you know, the safety of the ship. The Spartans are the reason that we still have the Infinity.
Yeah, and so this is when he says, now it's time to pay dues. They're no longer Navy. They're no longer Army. They're no longer Marines. They're their own branch of the military. From here on out, Spartans are their own branch. And that's essentially how it ends. And you know, the last lines from this, him talking to them, is Spartans are what will see us through the darkness ahead and into the dawn beyond. I told you we needed Spartans, so I made some.
So exactly that bookend phrase that we heard. And I truly love this last panel. If you've ever seen a more Marvel or DC, like if you're seeing an Avengers Assemble looking cover, it's this right here.
Yeah. And so that's it, closing this hardback version of all 3 issues, because let's talk about really quick. Let's just run through publication history, release versions, and what does this do for the lore?
Yeah, so as far as publication, you know, we had our 3 issues that came out that come into this compendium in this trade. We have issue 1 came out August 14th, 2013. Issue 2, less than a month later, September 11th, 2013. And once again, less than a month later, issue 3, October 9th, 2013. So actually slated 1 per month, like a typical comic series. So it's really awesome to see that they actually stayed on that timeline, and it wasn't a 1.5-year gap between all 3 of them, you know, to have this come. And then obviously our release versions, the individual issues, as well as the hardback trade released January 8th, 2014.
That's the version we used for this episode that I got at a goth garage sale. So
as one does.
So let's talk about what does this do for the lore. And for 3 issues, it actually does quite a bit.
Yes.
So to start, it shows the origins of Spartan Palmer and Davis and how they became Spartans. Because, you know, we have Spartan Assault where we just have these 2 Spartans who are Spartans. We don't know anything about them.
Well, exactly. And especially with Palmer. I mean, that's our most important character, this entire thing that we're seeing as far as the games go. And we're really getting to see, you know, a start to her, I would say.
Yeah. We also learn the fate of June after Reach, which was a big one because in my heart, A Fistful of Arrows is still canon, and this doesn't mess with that by any means. So, you know, he's a suit and tie kind of guy now, which boring, but whatever. He's a recruiter. He's got to eat. He's got to eat. So
he still knows how to handle himself.
This is true. We also learn that, you know, Spartan Palmer and her original crew weren't the first Spartan force. In fact, that there were, as I said, Isla Zane, who went crazy, who hand-to-hand, without armor, can almost basically take out Palmer.
Was going to.
Yeah, potentially. We don't know for sure.
I'm going to say yes.
We don't know for sure.
She was going to kill her. She's going to kill her until they vent her.
Which is very impressive nonetheless. Yes. And she shows up in the lore later on, and she's just terrifying. She's just this... She's crazy, essentially, which is what happens.
Yeah. Another major aspect that we do see is obviously Musa 096 at the time as a commander who started the Spartan IV program.
Yeah.
So this is another, I believe it's called them washouts, but another Spartan who didn't make it past augmentation period, obviously wheelchair bound. Huge hate for Halsey.
Huh, par for the course.
Exactly. And I think that really applies to any of the washouts or anyone who was not indoctrinated into her way of life. Because everyone else who made it through the program and has been a Spartan thinks of her almost as mom. Whereas all these are like, she's our evil stepmom type thing, where it's like, we need to get back at her. She's the one who did this to us. And I think the reality is a lot of Spartans never truly figured out what happened to them. So they're just going along like, oh, I'm here. You know, I meant to serve the UNSC. I meant to save everybody.
Yeah.
But especially in the books and other materials, we see just how damning that is.
Yeah.
And we don't see it as like a rah, rah, yay, you know, we're saving Earth. It's like, this was a really bad thing that happened that in a way had to happen. But I love they explore the morals of it.
Yeah.
And talk about it.
Yeah. And finally, what does this do for the lore is that Spartans now are their own branch of the military, which I think is huge.
Yes, and that gives influence coming up. Like I said, especially adding in the armor selection and seeing that there's going to be a lot more, because this is really the first time all of the military is going to be backing them. Because the 2s were obviously a secret forever. The 3s were still a secret. You know, they were still backed by ONI and by some of the UNSC, but they were still a secret program. And this is the first going to be public program. And they're going to have like the propaganda posters of like, you know, Uncle Sam, like, come on and join in, be a Spartan today.
Well, also it's volunteer.
Yes, it's the first time it's volunteer, not kids.
Yeah, and because they relied on children's revenge and hate for the Covenant.
For 3.
For Spartan 3s, yes. And for 4, it's you're a decorated soldier. Do you want to do more?
Yes. Do you want to do more? Do you think you want to push more? You know, obviously you have the passion to serve and the passion for your countrymen. You know, what can you do? Like, what can we do to help you enhance those things and to do even more for your planet and for your people?
Do you want to start recruiting? Because I almost want to be a Spartan 4 now. You almost have me sold there.
It depends how much I get paid and if I have to do anything.
So let's move on to the general reaction and reception of this comic, this mini-series, really. So Halo Initiation is a short and sweet comic run. It gave the Halo fandom answers about the Halo 4s and Sarah Palmer. Some reviewers did feel that the story overall lacked substance. A lot was told in only 3 issues, and thus it felt rather rushed. Some fans still feel, though, that the story did what it needed to do, with no excess information that was unneeded. Overall, fans have been rather split on how they feel about the miniseries. So, and the reviews really kind of reflect that, and I will say IGN's score that we're going to read off was only for the first issue. They didn't review the second issue or the second or third issue, and we'll see why, because IGN gave it a 4.6 out of 10. They gave that first issue a low score and basically was like, this is the debut of Dark Horse and Halo. Like, this is really like what you're going to give us. So I really think that IGN was like, we're not going to review this anymore. We're not going to do these other 2 issues.
Well, you have to figure that issue pretty much broke off just with Palmer's training. So you have to think of it as, oh, you're just kind of fall of reaching us and just kind of retelling this, which in a way is, I appreciate as a nod to like how all the Spartan programs start. But if you're expecting, it's kind of just retelling the same story, but you now own the IP. It's like Disney doing Star Wars 7.
Yeah.
It's just a bigger Death Star.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but, you know, we had Comic Book Roundup would give it a 6 out of 10. Goodread users would give it a 3.8 out of 5. Mirrodin Games would give it a 3 out of 5. Comixology would give it a 3.9 out of 5. And Kobo would give it a 4 out of 5. So IGN does throw off that average, but, you know, kind of that asterisk of it was only 1 issue, and I think they were really like, nah, we're okay.
Yeah, I think for them too. And depending how marketing went and things like that, it's more like, it's the same thing. You know, same old story.
Yeah, do we want to put time and resources into writing an article for this? But with that being said, let's talk about how we felt about the comic series itself. Let's sit back, relax, and go freeform. So as always, Alex, please start us off.
Yeah, so as far as this entire series, you know, I think that Initiation, started telling what could have been a really interesting story in the interim. I just don't think they had enough issues.
Yeah.
I think if this was possibly a 5-issue series, it could have been a really good miniseries. We talked about this before the podcast. My issue with it is, we get Palmer drop in. That was a really cool fight. Okay, she's a Spartan now. Okay, we don't really care about her anymore. Now this is about Infinity and who, June and Del Rio and all these other admirals are, and getting the Spartan IV program going. So it's trying to tell, I think, too many things at once.
Yeah.
And instead of giving it, because you could have had an entire issue that's just Palmer training and how the training goes and how everything is, lead into a little bit more of that into the second issue, and then switch. Like kind of have an issue and a half for each of these things to really flesh it out. And then we're left with a head spoiler with Isla Zane. We don't ever really see her again until, like you said, the Hunt the Truth podcast.
Yeah, that's going off of memory. That's the first time I remember her popping back
up. Yeah, and I
up.
believe there's one more little mention of her, but to leave such a cliffhanger of her being like, the ship uncloaks, it obviously has like Admiralty on it. Who are you? And to kind of leave that up in the air and never really touch that material I wouldn't say this is mainstream, but it's more mainstream than the Hunt the Truth podcast in a way, where it's like, it's a comic book, something that people can grab.
And I absolutely agree. And as a whole, I mean, we talked about how people felt that it was really rushed. And even you and I, before we started recording, we were talking about this, and we're like, this could have been a lot cooler if there were 2 more issues. Because it was like, after a while when I was reading this, I was like, this stuff's kind of rushing. Like, the insurrectionists show up to fight all those other Spartans, and Lasky just runs up and just presses a button and it goes away. Like, I get there's a lesson there, but it could have been a little more drawn out. In situations like that, like, I think give us a little bit more of how Isla Zane and Palmer see each other within a fight. Maybe starts as a gunfight and then leads into a fist fight, something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. Cause it was really neat whenever she slaps that handgun away from Palmer. It's like, no, hand to hand. I thought that's such a cool moment, but it was just so overshadowed by rushed panels around it. And like you said, that fight in the hallway, it was pew, 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 door closed, done. So it wasn't, the entire material could have lent just a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying what we were presented wasn't bad. I mean, I think it's really good. We did take some tropes that were very obvious nods to the Fall of Reach and whatnot with, oh, you can't go first. It's not about the glory. It's about the team. Which the only thing, it's like, she's an established ODST. Do you really think that this would be like what she's going for right now? Then again, I could be wrong, but it's like I wouldn't expect like a really established ODST to not be a team player.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, you see her as I think they try and show it that she's a lone wolf at the beginning because she takes on that brute by herself and she knows how to handle herself, and she gets a promotion after that and all these other things. So I think her story is a little too rushed. I definitely appreciate her a lot more after reading this because you just kind of get introduced to her. And I know a lot of people don't like her because she's just kind of, yippee at Chief, like to start and kind of like always in your ear on these type of things. But I think if we got more of these backstories and a lot more, because now we're just getting like Spartan 3, Spartan 4 just thrown at us and not really getting that same appreciation we did for Chief, even Blue Team, even all those teams were like, we got a lot of books and games and materials on them and really got to know them. With this, it's like, here's Lasky, he's got a movie, here, or a miniseries. Here's Palmer, she gets a 3-issue comic.
Yeah.
And I get that. I appreciate it. I think they didn't have to do it, but I'm glad they did to get an idea of who they were and how they started. I just wish a little bit more time was dedicated to it to just flesh it out a little bit more, to give us just a little bit more reason to root for them or to not root for them, like Isla Zane, And my issue with that, too, is why not do something with her right after that? Why not put...
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Because we do have some comics coming up that you and I have never read before.
It's very true. So I do agree with that. I think this, too, is always a gripe I've had with the Halo universe. I wish they explored the Insurrectionists so much more.
Yeah.
And I really wish they pushed a lot more of that. granted, I get it. The video game is shoot bad guys that are aliens or robots or dogs. So I get that that's what the game is. However, in the peripheral material, I wish a little bit more was gone into that. And they have. They have in Contact Harvest. They have in various other outlets gone into it. Even through Kilo 5, we're seeing it.
Yeah.
I just wish there was just a little bit more, you know, exploration. Just a hint more.
Yeah, and I will say, if I have to rank this in terms of all the Halo comics we've gone through so far, I'm going to say it's at the end. But I don't say that as a bad thing. I just think what Marvel and Microsoft did with the comics were phenomenal. I mean,
Yes.
we still talk about how Uprising is kind of like that gold standard for us for Halo comics.
Even Fistful of Arrows. I mean, a fan-made canonical / non-canonical comic, you know, in Limbo, like you said, it is ranked last for me, but that's in no terms means it's bad. It just means the other ones are just so much more superior, but also definitely had more to flesh out with.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even the art, I'd say, was a little, I don't want to say phoned in, but the art, I think, is like the least detailed art we've got so far.
The most generic, I would say.
Yeah. And again, not necessarily a bad thing. I get it. It's just kind of like what they had to work with. I don't know the timeline. I couldn't find the timeline or anything of how long this comic took. It could have been a very short period. I don't know necessarily.
However, with that being said, I truly, truly would love to see more miniseries like this on characters. Even if you're only giving me 3 issues, I think you need to shave a little bit off of it then. I think you give us a little bit too much material to not flesh out.
We've gotten a little bit, but they've been mixed as well. I know, like, one of the more recent ones was Lone Wolf with Linda.
Yes. Yeah, we could get a couple more, but I would just love to see even more of this, or even just more short stories. Give me like a 20-page short story on some of these characters. I think it'd just be fun.
Well, even then, it doesn't have to be a physical release. Just randomly post it on Waypoint and like let us read. Like, because I'm a short story guy through and through. That's what I go for. So like, imagine not even a compendium or anything like that, but imagine if just a few times a year we're just getting random short stories.
See, I would love to see something like that where you reach out to the fans and say, "Hey, you guys know Spartan, 122? We don't know too much. Let's write something. Like, let's do a contest. Winner gets a copy of Infinite, or winner gets this." And you just have all these really awesome fan-created things that becomes canonical, that fits together. I think it would just be so cool. So back off that soapbox tangent, coming back to it. So what kind of score would you give it?
See, this one I'm really torn on, and I know this is going to seem like a bad one, but I want to say a 6 or 6.5 out of 10. Only because I felt it was rushed. I feel like if we would have gotten 5 issues, it'd be 8.5. But again, really, if we just had more of these battles and everything like that, a little more explored, their training, I get that we got the lesson once. Hey, don't go for glory. Okay, let's see it. If you're gonna do that parallel with the Fall of Reach, give us the parallel where they learn their lesson.
However, you also have to look at what they did with Lasky's story, his miniseries. They did that. They did a whole thing on him just going through training and all of those things and kind of being the lone wolf and doing all this stuff. So we have seen it before. And like you and I said, it wasn't crazy high on our list of things we put at the top of Halo. So I have to disagree on that aspect, but I have to agree that even if they only showed that, it needed to be a couple more panels to really let it sink in, to have something really have a recourse towards it, or to have, and I think too, the last thing I'll bring up, I wish there was more banter. I wish there was more banter between Spartans. We get these 5 Spartans that are random. Somehow her and Davis partner up. We don't know how, because we don't have any relationship between them. And the other 3 are just there.
Yeah.
So that being said, I would probably give this 1 giant Spartan mess hall, obviously on S deck. Divide that by how much I really don't like Del Rio. Never liked him.
No one likes him.
But yeah, take him out of there. Add in the addition of Spartan IV, pretty neat. But then percent that by probably the food we didn't get to see in the mess hall, because that would have been kind of cool to see. But then add in some space, and you got yourself a comic book.
Fair. I agree with that. I agree with that score.
Thank you.
And that is Halo Initiation, our first comic series that we are covering from 343 Industries. They did do a comic version of The Fall of Reach, but we've already read that book. We know the story.
Well, and it's tough. It's like I said, mixed reviews. You're trying to tell a decently long, I wouldn't say a long book, but it's a novel. It's trying to tell a novel in a comic format is hard when you only have X amount of resources.
Yeah. But our next episode will be Halo Escalation, which was an ongoing series. I believe it was 25 issues. So we're going to go from 3 issues to 25 issues.
Yeah, so we have a little bit more to explore, which I'm pretty excited about, and it should be a great time.
Yeah.
And as always, want to thank those patrons that make this entire podcast possible. If you want to sign up for our Patreon, we have links all over the place. You can always message us. But we have some really cool stuff coming along with, exclusive swag bags, bonus episodes, Patreon game nights, shout outs that we're going to hear, plenty of other stuff, notes, things like that. You can always ask us what's in it or check out the Patreon for yourself. But let's go ahead and thank those people today. We have Charles Zitter, Taqtix, Skyjack, Harvey Chong, Brendan Reshetar, AngryCanadien, ZZ Slipaway, Grant Dillon, Mr. Chofe, Cowyn Fong-Feliciano, DragonFire, Brenton Bagley, James Yervasi, Jonas, DGamer1298, Duststorm, Alejandro Jaramillo, Dilfix, QuantumEasy, thatLIgamerguy, Graham, Jamie Sneed, McCrae Austin, Mega, Thomas Goulding, Nick Hyman, Francis, and Matt Smith. So thank you all so much for supporting us. Like I said, wouldn't be possible without you.
Yeah, and if you want to know where to find us on any and all social media, or we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, where you can message us if you have any questions as well, and we'll have links to those in the description of these episodes. And if you want to go and leave us a review on anything, please give us a star rating on iTunes, as well as a review. That really does help us. And if you're on Spotify, continue to do so.
Yeah, hit us up on Angie's List. Make sure you're over there, and
bbb.org.
Got to do it.
But yeah, with that being said, after you go and find us on BBB or Angie's List or anything like that, that was Halo Initiation. And as we said, our next episode will be Halo Escalation. I am your host, Jesse Reiners.
And I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
And thank you for tuning in to Finish the Fight, a Halo podcast.
No, I think we're just getting started.